Ukraine can win. But Ukraine can only win if we allow it to, if we give it the help that it needs. And the idea that Putin can lay down red lines and say, oh, if NATO let their missiles be used on Russian territory, that's war. Well, it is war already. He is the aggressor. We should ignore his red lines. My own view is that Putin is on shaky ground at home in the Kremlin.
Now, currently, the Defence Secretary, John Healey, is in Germany meeting Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. Zelensky is urging his backers, us, Germany, the United States, to allow long-range missiles to carry out attacks inside of Russia. Ahead of the gathering, we announced the UK said we'd send Ukraine a package of 650 air defence missiles by the end of the year. The US has committed to another $250 million of equipment for the war effort. Andrew Robathan, Lord Robathan, is former Defence and Armed Forces Minister who joins us now. Andrew, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
What are you expecting the plea to be from Zelensky, and in reality, what we'll be able to offer him?
Well, the plea will definitely be in that he'll be able to use long-range missiles like Storm Shadow right into Russia. And I'll say three things, if I may. First, this is the most dangerous time of most people's lives since the Cuban Missile Crisis. We are in a really dangerous time for the world. The second thing is that it's no good saying there's a squabble between people a long way away. This war affects us. If Putin wins, we are all going to be in deep trouble. And the third thing is Ukraine can win. But Ukraine can only win if we allow it to, if we give it the help that it needs. And the idea that Putin can lay down red lines and say, oh, if NATO let their missiles be used on Russian territory, that's war. Well, it is war already. He is the aggressor. We should ignore his red lines. My own view is that Putin is on shaky ground at home in the Kremlin, although I may be wrong. But I think we must allow Zelensky and the Ukrainians to strike the launch pads of the missiles that are striking Ukraine.
So how would that change where we currently are?
Well, currently they're only allowed to use the missiles on Ukrainian territory and into Ukrainian territory, although I think some probably have strayed across the border. The long-range missiles from Russia, fired 200 or whatever miles away into Russia, are able to be launched and then only be struck at the moment by defense missiles in Ukraine. Now, obviously, it'd be much better if the Ukrainians could launch attacks on the launch pads of missiles.
You can understand the concern. I mean, it sounds silly to even lay it out that if we, bulk up Ukraine's missile supply to the extent where in Russian territory they were then causing loss of life in Russia and they were our weapons, that could escalate very significantly and very rapidly.
That's exactly what Putin says. But if we're to believe him, that's one thing. Just remember an argument between two peoples of whom we know very little in a long country, a long way away, which is what Chamberlain said in 1938. Now, of course, there's not a direct analogy, but if you give way to dictators, which Putin is, they will just come back for more. And I have to say that now is the time to strike, to allow the Ukrainians to strike. And the idea that Putin tells us we can't use our weapons, or rather, Ukrainians can't use weapons we've given them into Russia is nonsense. I mean, and by the way, it's not just the Labour government, the Americans and whatever. It was the same under the Conservatives as well. We need to understand that this war affects us, and we must see Ukraine defeat Putin.
So would you say the Prime Minister's not taking this conflict seriously?
Oh, I didn't say that. No, I didn't say that at all.
The plea that you're making to me really is one that you want Keir Starmer and David Lammy to listen to.
Yes, I know John Healey a bit. I think he's a good man. I suspect he is arguing for this. Of course.
So what's stopping them? If you think, and sorry, I said David Lammy, but I mean, of course, the Foreign Secretary. If the Defence Secretary is petitioning for this, what is going to stop them?
Well, what is stopping them is some concerns, first of all, about the Americans who provide components. I'm not sure of the exact details for Storm Shadow missiles, and they're reticent. But again, the Americans need to realize isolationism, which is, by the way, what Trump is talking about. Isolationism didn't work in the 30s. And we're back in those sort of that territory, if you ask me. We need to understand that Putin must be stopped. And I think now is a good time because he's on pretty shaky ground with the invasion of Kursk or the incursion into Kursk by the Ukrainians. And I think a lot of people in the Kremlin, a lot of his moguls, his oligarchs around him, are going to be pretty worried.
And the debate continues and will be continuing right now as we speak in Germany about how they decide to try and
Indeed.
take on Putin further. I wonder, the conversation politically that we've been having ever since we've had a new government is, this significant budget deficit that the Chancellor keeps telling us about. In amidst that, the Prime Minister has promised that we will get to spending 2.5% of national income on defence. He hasn't set a date yet for doing that. Are you nervous that when we hear the conversations about, cuts that are being having to made, potential of looming tax rises at the budget at the end of end of October, that defence is not going to be the priority?
Well, I am concerned. And look, the first duty of government is the defence of the realm, always has been. And we need to understand that this war in Ukraine affects us. Other wars affect us. We need to be in a position to prevent war, and you prevent war by being prepared for it. And we are, I'm afraid it was the last Conservative government cut far too far. And I was part of the government, so I apologise for that, although I did think about resigning. And actually, we are now in a different ball game where we have an aggressor in Europe, and if he should win in Ukraine, he will almost certainly turn on the Baltic states and possibly Poland. And Poland's really worried about this, as are the Baltic states. We need to stop Putin, who is not some cozy fellow, as we hoped. We hoped the Russians might come into the normal behaviour of the West. They are not. They are this regime is aggressive, expansionist, and frightening. And he doesn't care how many people die, Russians or others, and we need to stop him.
Lord Robathan, thank you very much. Former Defence and Armed Forces Minister, laying out his case very clearly here on Times Radio.
Вот так вот за столом. Вот так, брат. Ближе к тебе, девочка. Плюс принял. Выстрел!